Speaking of warnings, we're going to look at that today. Some warning signs. We're in Acts 27. Paul is on his way to Rome. Now, he's not on his way to Rome. It's voluntarily, but not voluntarily. He wants to go. He wants to preach the word. He's going because God has told him this is an opportunity. It doesn't look like one. It looks like a jail sentence. It looks like a trial. And it's going to look like house arrest. But before he gets there, it's going to look like a storm. They are traveling at a time to Rome by sea that was the worst time of year to travel. And we'll see that detail as we read the text here in a second, that it's in the fall, September, October, right after the Day of Atonement. And that was the time when instead of getting out in your ships and boats and sailing across the Mediterranean, you brought your boats into their harbors, safe harbor, or maybe even into dry dock, and you waited out the stormy season. But they had decided not to. They thought, well, I can handle it. And I think that's probably what a few people were thinking when they lit up their barbecue grill last week. I think that's what some of them were thinking when they lit their trash barrel last week. That's what some of them were thinking when they did other things last week. I went down the highway one time, and it was clear that's what somebody was thinking when they threw their cigarette out the window. There are warnings about all those things, aren't there, this week? And there should be, and there still are, just in case anybody's not aware, still under a burn ban, still. You don't want to work that much, do you? No. People have had enough of that. Weston is tired. They would appreciate it if you would just not do that. I'm going to repeat that here in a second, by the way. I got a whole slide. But warning signs matter. When Tanya's grandfather, when he was working in his career before he retired, he worked for Firestone. He developed their test tracks. He did the one at Fort Stockton, the one at Acuna, where Jose works. He didn't work at the test track, but in Acuna. He designed those and a couple of others, and he would drive. I never got to ride with him on the track, but I rode with him in traffic, and I don't think there was a difference. I'm pretty sure. And he told me something that I love and that Tanya hates, and that was the truth about the warning signs. Now, I'm not going to give you details about what he told me because I do not want to be liable for anything that you do when you leave here. Okay? So I'm not going to tell you what he said, but he told me a little bit of a secret about those things, and I enjoy it. Tanya doesn't. That's all I'm going to say. But that being said, those warning signs before curves are there for a reason. Do not pass stripes are there for a reason. I realize all of you who drive on the access road have no clue what I'm talking about, but they are there for a reason. The worst thing on the access road, I am so glad I don't live over on the other side of Brownwood anymore for that. There's the only thing I didn't like about it, that one reason, was all of the people. I'm not going to give some of the identifiers, but there was a trend. I'm just going to put it that way. In the great big suburban soccer mobiles with phones bigger than this. Y'all figured it out, didn't you? With phones bigger than this, resting on top of the steering wheel while they texted and watched TikTok. You could always tell those people because they didn't know there were curves. They didn't know there were other people in the world. They didn't know anything except gas pedals and TikTok. And that's you'll see them. You know what I'm talking about if you ever drive over there very much. But warning signs matter. Unfortunately, we learn that the hard way, don't we? Fire warning signs matter for people who lost 55,000 acres of land. They really matter. People who have had to go to funerals for people who died because of texting and driving. Warnings matter. People who put their feet up on the airbag and then later wish they still had feet. Warnings matter. That's a thank you. She's like, yes, I'm telling you. I've seen you barefooted people up there on the airbag, and I pray for you. I do, because those things matter. You've got an explosion possible right there under your feet. But none of those are even the most important ones. Paul was going through a time here in Acts 27 where it was kind of like those things. It was on the level of wildfires and shark-infested waters and things like that he's dealing with. But when we get to the second half, in a couple of weeks we'll do this, when we get to the second half of this chapter, we're going to see that there were things far more dire even than the storms they faced. But today we're just going to look at the beginning of the problem, and that was they did not heed the warnings that they got, and they really should have. They really should have. They thought they could handle things they could not handle, just like us all the time. So let's read this text. It's just 1 through 12 that we're going to look at, and you'll need to open up your own Bible. It's not going to be on the screen. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius. Turns out Julius, by the way, was Paul's guard for quite a while, all through this journey, and treated Paul pretty well. But this centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment, we boarded a ship from that place right there. I'm not going to try it this morning. About to sail for ports along with the coast of the province of Asia, and we went out to sea. Aristarchus, who was a brother in Christ, who traveled with Paul quite a bit, really faithful guy. Everything you ever read about him is good. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day, we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there, we put out to sea again and passed from the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. That was like the first little warning. The winds were against them. That doesn't seem like necessarily that big a deal. If you've lived in Lubbock, you feel like that's your whole life. But the winds were against them, and that makes everything harder. And so when they had sailed across the open sea, this is verse 5, off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra and Lycia. There the Centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing from Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days. Okay, I meant to put a map in, and I just forgot. But if you look at a map, it's not really the biggest journey here. The fact that it took many days to go from here to Dallas is incredible, even in the first century. It tells you how bad it was. And that should have been their first warning sign. The weather is against you. This is not going to be easy. Maybe we've already missed the window, and they already know it's close. Paul's going to bring that up. And maybe they just shouldn't be out where they are. You ever felt that way? You just shouldn't be out where you are. So, verse 7, we made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the feast. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives as well." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. And since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. Okay, so you have all of this set up for what we're going to look at in a couple of weeks, because it gets way worse. You're familiar with his life. You know that he's going to get into a shipwreck and is in a really incredible, dramatic circumstance. And there's a lot more there than just ships and boats and storms. There is a principle of trust and obey and believing in what Jesus tells you that we'll get to when we get to the rest of the story. But before we get to that, there are lessons right here, just practical, everyday stuff that we need to remember. We, as human beings, don't always listen all that well, and we don't heed the warnings that we should. How many of us, for example, have either eaten something, drank something, or smoked something that we shouldn't have, even though there were labels all over the place? That's everybody, isn't it? Everybody. We've all done that. Maybe you haven't done all three. Maybe you didn't eat, drink, and smoke, but you know, Bill Clinton he didn't inhale. But you might have done eat, drink, and not inhale. I have no idea. But you got your issues, I got mine, we all have them. And then what happens? We think we will get away with it. And then the consequences start to show up. And some of those consequences are bad health. Some of those consequences are bad decisions. Some of those consequences affect the rest of our life. Some of those consequences end our lives early. Some of them make our life not end early, but become a lack of quality of life that we regret for as long as the Lord gives us. It's a problem, isn't it? Put that into spiritual terms, and it gets even worse. All right. I told you there was a slide with Smokey Bear. Don't you like Smokey? I love that museum in New Mexico when I was a kid. Smokey Bear. Remember, only you can prevent forest fires. Why don't we listen then? Why don't we pay attention when we get the warnings that we get? Why didn't they? When you look at the text, it tells us why they didn't listen. We'll look at it here in just a second. But many times it's because we're just flat dismissive. It's no big deal. I mean, we don't even entertain it. We don't think about it. We just say, it's no big deal. That's not going to hurt me. It's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. The Bible says, do not fear. It's going to be fine. I think it's hilarious that verse has become one of the most quoted verses, but we've quoted it in so many different arenas where God never said it and Jesus never intended it. There are things you're supposed to be afraid of. Storms, actually, one of them. Burning down your livelihood, one of them. Eating yourself into oblivion, one of them. You should be afraid of those things. More so, the effects of sin on the soul, you should pay attention to. It is not without effect. Whatever. Preacher's just talking, whatever. It's no big deal. I can handle it. I can handle it. It's not a big deal. I can handle it. Can you though? Can you though? There's a world full of graves that might say otherwise, both physical and spiritual. We think we're too smart. We're experts. We're experts in everything these days, aren't we? Everybody with a Google thinks that they are an expert in something or everything. And the truth is, most of us are expert in very little. And that's actually okay. Nobody says you have to be, right? But for some reason, we think we have to be. And so we think that we are the end of all information and decision making. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. That is the equivalent, half the time, of hold my beer and watch this. You know I'm right. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I've seen people do things with gasoline. They all said, I know what I'm doing. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were doing. Now they walk around with no eyebrows like Whoopi Goldberg, that they didn't know what they were doing. You know, I'm not picking on anybody because I was trying to light a gas fireplace one time, and I did the whoopee. It happened to me, okay? It's happened. So you can't tell it because now I got the opposite of the Whoopi Goldberg. I have light-colored hair. You can't see my eyebrows, but let me just tell you, they're like mesquite trees growing across my forehead. It happens. Expertise. I know what I'm doing. We don't always know what we're doing. If we don't think we know what we're doing, we at least think this. We're the exception to the rule. Well, that's for other people. Everybody else can do that, but I can handle it. That's not for me. That's not about me. That's not, you people can't burn things, but I can burn things. And then what happens? Next thing you know, we're all paying the price because we all think we're the exception. It won't hurt me. I hold my liquor better than everybody else. I can drive. You know, as a preacher, I just tell you this. We really don't like doing funerals because people thought they were the exception to the rules. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean you get tired of comforting families who are there because somebody thought they were an exception. It gets old. You know, it dawned on me not that long ago that somebody was talking about going on a trip, on a vacation with their childhood friend, and about how fun that was going to be because they'd been doing this their whole life, and it dawned on me that the friend that I would have been doing that with isn't here because a drunk driver. And it really just it's so weird because that was, good grief, 30 years ago. But it just sucker punched me like out of nowhere. You get tired of the consequences of humans thinking they are the exception to every consequence and every rule. We're not the exception. And I'm going to do what I want to do. It doesn't make you look tough. It makes you look stupid. Okay? It just does. That's a biblical word. It's in the book of Proverbs. Look it up, NIV. Bad counsel. Bad counsel. How many of us try to justify what we do with, but my friend said it was a good idea. Sometimes you need better friends. That's all I can tell you. Sometimes you need better friends. I've said this before. I'll say it again because I just think we got to let it sink in. If your friends think every decision you ever make was wise, you got to find some smarter friends. Just because none of us are that smart. None of us have made every decision well. None of us are always right and have keen insight into our circumstance. Just none of us. We're just not that good. You need wise counsel, but as we'll see here in a second, you need to be really picky about who that wise counsel is. And this last one drives all the ones above, doesn't it? Pride, and then some. That's why I put others. You can think of some more. But pride, you can't tell me what to do. How many of you said it this week? Well, they can't tell me I'm not going to do it. No, maybe they can't. But the Lord sure wishes you'd listen, right? We say things like that all the time, but we don't know what we're saying. We're not the experts we think we are. Acts 27, 9-12, let's look back at this again, because this is what happens with Paul. He looks at them and says, hey guys, this is not going to be good. It's already too late. And he's telling them something they should have known. I understand why they would have dismissed him, okay? Paul is just a Bible teacher, right? It's like having the preacher tell you how to sail around the world. I don't know how to sail around the world. I would understand why you wouldn't want to listen to me about when to sail the Mediterranean. What do I know? I have no idea. No idea. And you understand why they would look at Paul this way. And then there's another layer. N.T. Wright points out that, Jews were land-loving people. They actually did not trust the sea. They had a lot of lore and legend built up around the sea being full of demons and bad characters, and they were not going to go there. And you never heard about the great Israeli Navy in the days of Solomon. This didn't exist. And so not only is Paul a Bible teacher, but they're going, yeah, but what would you know? You're like getting sailing advice from somebody in Odessa. Why would we care? You ain't got water. So they dismiss him. I get it. I think you get it. Why would they listen to Paul? Why would they listen to me? You kind of understand where they're coming from, but what he's telling them is actually sound advice. It makes sense. He's actually feeding back probably things he learned from people like them. He might even be repeating some of the conversations they had had just a few days before. By now, it was after the Day of Atonement. That tells us September, October. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous. That's his warning. This is not going to go well. Don't you love it when you're the person who has to speak up to people you know probably aren't going to listen to you and say, that's not working. I love you, but it's not working. We really can't go there. We don't need to do this. It's not going to go well. I don't think any of us ever like being that person, but sometimes we have to be. And so Paul speaks up. It's going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. Some of the translations word it like, we're going to die. And so they might have looked at him and go, well, yeah, you coming here from Jerusalem. Of course you think we're going to die on the water. It's just Chicken Little. Then verse 11, the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, which we kind of understand, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Who would you have listened to in that circumstance? Maybe the owner of the ship and a pilot with experience? It makes sense. Sometimes in life, we think that the best source of information is somebody who has gone through what we're about to go through. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes that's sound. People who have been through what we're going through can give us insight and wisdom because of what they've been through. But it's not a guarantee. Some people don't learn from what they've been through, or they don't learn the right lessons from what they've been through. And so you go to them for advice and wisdom because they've been through it, and what you get back is just more advice that's not only going to not get you through this well, but may land you right back in the same spot again because they also are on repeat. So it's not a guarantee. We have to be wiser than that. Look for better sources than that. So I understand why they did what they did. In the same circumstance, might have done the same thing. But you don't listen to the people with the experience like that and ignore the circumstance around you. They should have been able to look at the skies. They should have been able to look at the seas and known that his advice was sound. But we're the exception. We can make it. We're prideful. Hey, we got experience with this. We know what to do. And again, they're not being evil, but they're not being wise. And that's how we get in a lot of our trouble. It's not always because we're being evil. It's just because we're not always being wise in the moment and as discerning as we ought to be because of those weaknesses that play into our decision making. So what did they do? Verse 12, since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, which was kind of a good excuse not to stay there, the majority decided that we should all sail on. Well, you know what? The majority used to use AOL for their online service too, and that was a huge mistake. The majority does a lot of things that aren't wise. If you were looking at food, the majority eats quarter pounders with cheese. The majority have to go to the doctor because they eat quarter pounders with cheese, right? I get it. They're good. Although the other day I got one that had enough salt to make Lot's wife all over again. Whew, mercy. I don't know what the deal was there. But it's not a wise decision every time, is it? Anybody tells you, no, don't listen. I don't know what they're talking about. It's not always a wise decision. It might never be a wise decision. But it's the majority decision. The majority isn't the determiner of truth. What's most common isn't the majority of truth. So what is? How then do we find the way that we need to go? Proverbs 15:22. I'm going to backtrack into this one about wise counsel. Plans fail for lack of counsel. Most of those lists of what to do go into, I don't need anybody else telling me. I don't need them telling me smarter. I don't need them telling me wiser. I don't need them telling me anything. I got it. That's a fool's errand. Even Jesus sought the wisdom of God when he was going through things. The Garden of Gethsemane. If Jesus needed to consult the Lord, what about us? If the disciples had to come together, and Paul himself in Jerusalem in Acts 15, and speak with one another and consult the Word and listen to the Holy Spirit in order to know how to handle things, what about us? There will be no point in our life where we are so mature and so wise and so smart and so experienced that we can just do it without taking any input. That's pride. The devil takes us like a cattle chute in that direction because he knows. Pride goes before the fall. Get good counselors in your life. You don't have to have 20 of them, but have at least a few people in your life that you can say, does this sound right to you? Do you think I'm on the right track? Am I making the right decision here? And when they tell you, that doesn't seem to be what God would want for you, listen. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but listen, pray, and discern. There is wisdom in good counselors, and Proverbs echoes that over and over again. And Solomon learned that both the easy way and the hard way. There were times when he had good ones, and there were times when he had bad ones. And it was a lesson learned. So choose your counsel wisely. The King Saul, before David, did not do that. He had a relationship with God. He had God telling him how to lead and what to do. And he second-guessed that and went instead to bad counsel. Saul died because, why did Saul die? Well, because he took his own life. Yeah, but why did he end up in a place where that's what he did? How did he get there? He was unfaithful to the Lord. How was he unfaithful to the Lord? He didn't keep the word of the Lord. He thought he could handle it. Saul was a very prideful man. He thought he could handle it. He thought he was smart enough. He thought he was big enough. He was king after all. And if a king can't make the decision, nobody can make the decision. And he made a lot of wrong ones. He didn't keep the word of the Lord. He even consulted a medium for his guidance. He went to wisdom outside of the wisdom of God. And I know we could sit here and camp on this and talk about, so that means I don't go to? Yeah, that is what that means. It does mean that. And in our time, people, that's just hokey that you can't do that. That's just silly. No, it's not silly. God meant it. And it didn't change when we went from Malachi to Matthew. He still doesn't want you to do that because you are seeking wisdom outside of the wisdom of God. And you are being unfaithful to the Lord. It's idolatry. But you know what? It's idolatry whether you go to a medium or not. Your medium may just be in the form of a best friend that you trust more than what's written plainly right here. When you look at the Word and say, well, I know that it says that, but my friend was telling me, what's the difference? What's the difference? Or, well, I know that the Word says that, but you know, I was Googling the other day and I found this website that said da-da-da-da-da-da. What's the difference? It's how he ended up where he was. He did not inquire of the Lord. He had the source of all wisdom. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. So why wouldn't you do that? God, what do you want from me here? Inquire of the Lord. Don't end up where Saul ended up. I want to look back at this list. Oh, I'm ahead of myself. One more passage. We need to know the Word to know whether or not people are saying what people say to us, what they advise of us, what they're trying to teach us. If you don't know the Word, you won't be able to discern it. So get into the Word so that you can know. I have hidden your Word in my heart so that I won't sin against you. I don't want to do what's wrong. So I'm trying to know your mind. I want to know your heart, God, so that I can discern what's the best way to go. So spend time in the Word so you know Him. Not just know about Him, you need to know Him. Would God approve of this? Would God want me to go there? In our study of the book, Seeing the Unseen, he uses the example of, are you going places and doing things that you know the angels would never approve of being? It's a good line from that book. If you would look around the room and say, well, the angels sure wouldn't be here, what are you doing there? But you got to know God's will and God's character and God to be able to discern that, because we'll lie to ourselves about what the angels might put up with, right? Because we're dismissive. But instead of being dismissive, these are the alternatives. Instead of being dismissive, ask yourself this question. Is there wisdom here? In what I'm thinking and what I'm wanting to do, is there wisdom here? Was there wisdom in sailing at a time when every experienced sailor would have told you, except for the one on that boat, this is the wrong time of year to make that trip? What about what you're going through, what you're struggling with, what decision you need to make? Is it wise? Because wisdom matters. Instead of trusting just in your own expertise, ask this: what might somebody else see that I'm not going to see? Get some wise eyes to look at it. And they might see something that you don't see. You're not the exception. Neither am I. We're just not. No matter how much we may want to be or think we are. We need to just realize, you know what? It's not about me. Sometimes those signs are up there for a reason. You know, you can't cheat physics. Your car will not go through that curve faster than the car and the curve were designed to handle. You don't actually multitask as well as you think you do. Ask anybody who studies the brain. You do not multitask as well as you think you do, but you don't even need to consult a neurologist to find that out. Ask the person driving behind you. You don't multitask as well as you think you do. They know that. I got film of you on my dash cam. We know this, right? And if your friend tells you, oh, no, you're really good at it, I've seen you. Wrong friend to ask. Wrong friend to ask. Your friends, too, need to ask. Ask together, is there anything we're not thinking about? Maybe we're not seeing this clearly. Maybe there's another way to look at it. And go to the Lord. And go to wise counsel again. Sometimes you got to go back again. Still wrestling with this. Is there something's not right? And then sometimes if it's never settled, maybe the advice of your great-grandmother was right. When in doubt, don't. When in doubt, don't. If this pilot of this ship had just thought of that, well, you know, maybe we just shouldn't do this today. The rest of the chapter, you wouldn't even have to sit through it here in a couple of weeks. But you're going to, right? Right, yeah. Pride, lead me, Lord, is the best alternative to pride. God, what would you have me do? And we seek His wisdom, and we listen, and we follow. It's not just a song, where He leads me, I will follow. It's not just a song, have thine own way, Lord. It's our life as disciples of Jesus Christ. We're going to sing this song, and we offer you now a time that we will pray for you. Maybe you're going through some stuff, and you need some wise counsel. Maybe you need to talk with one of our elders. Mark is here. Ralph is back there. Maybe you need their counsel. Maybe you need us to pray with you, and we will gladly do that. Maybe you need to start your life with Jesus. Maybe you realize, I've been putting Him off way too long, and it's time. If you're ready for any of those things, we offer the opportunity now as we sing this song. As we sing this song. As we sing this song.